let's go to midfield. You already mentioned Andrich. I just feel bad for whoever has to play next to Nmecha at the moment because I know he scored. And I know that Dortmund paid 35 million euros for him, and I know that within the industry there is this belief in the player and what he can bring. And I mean that sort of mindset, this the steadfast belief by people who work as coaches and scouts and getting paid a lot more money than either one of us to judge players, seem to really think highly of him. It's a similar vein than Emre Can, and I just struggle to see it. I know at the beginning of last year I wrote a little article on Nmecha when Dortmund sold Bellingham, right, and what he could bring to the field, and that there is tons of potential there and everything. But every time I see him play, it just feels pedestrian. It feels like there isn't enough there to really become this box-to-box aggressive leader on the field. I mean, where he differs to Emre Can, at least he doesn't show this overly aggressiveness, but maybe that's exactly what he needs. But he just seems like a very overrated player at times, Stefan. And it seems like he was giving this platform to shine, minutes to play by Julian Nagelsmann to show whether he can be an alternative to Angelo Stiller, Pavlovic, Kimmich. Goretzka is now getting a run of games again for Bayern Munich, it looks like, right? So we'll see where that leads to. And I don't know if he's done anything to justify future call-ups in my books.
Yeah, he's a deeply frustrated player, isn't he? I think, obviously, Dortmund kind of picked him up in that kind of mad dash hurry to try and find replacements to Jude Bellingham. They obviously had a huge amount of money in their back pocket to sign players. They picked up him, they picked up Marcel Sabitzer. I'm trying to remember if that was when he picked up Sally Özcan. I don't think it was. I think that was the year before, and he moved on. But, I think they kind of thought, instead of trying to find a direct replacement to Jude Bellingham, we'll sign 2 or 3 players and hope that if we mash them together in the team, they can kind of be that player. Marcel Sabitzer obviously comes in with the experience. He has the technical ability. He has he's a proven player at Bundesliga level, and then I think they kind of hoped that Nmecha would be this kind of physical box to box player that Jude Bellingham was for Germany. He has flashes of it. He's obviously quite decent close control. He's quite happy, kind of going shoulder to shoulder with players in the middle of the pitch, but he doesn't seem to have that ability to then do the next thing. He can maybe kind of shoulder a tackle or intercept the ball, but he doesn't have that ability like Jude Bellingham to then take 5 strides and then create a chance, or take 5 strides and score a goal. It's just something that seems to elude him. And look, that might just be a case of that. We see this a lot with players who are good at a bit of everything, and they just never really develop into a certain type of player, and they become a kind of jack of all trades, master of none, and just kind of end up being these kind of box to box number 8s that you really struggle to really justify having in your team. And hey, that might work quite well for a Wolfsburg or even a Dortmund at times, to have guys like that in the team who are happy just to run, close players down, pass the ball on to the playmaker and just keep at it. But in this Germany team, it didn't really seem to make sense. And as we were kind of talking about during the show, during the game in the live chat with the subscribers, I thought him and Robert Andrich were actually very far apart for much of the game. I thought Andrich kept dropping deep to kind of split the central defenders, and Nmecha was often kind of drifting around the pitch, and it left this huge gap in the middle of the park. I thought him and Julian Brandt were kind of stepping on each other's toes for much of the game as well. And yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, we're talking about a player now here who's let me quickly check. He's now 24. He'll be 25 next year. We're not talking about a 20 or 21-year-old here who's still learning his trade. We're talking about a player who should be established and should be, at this point, very easy to define as to what he actually adds to the game. But at the same time, find me a Dortmund player who isn't struggling this season, or find me a Dortmund player who's struggling to even get to the Germany team this season. So maybe a better head coach or a better club might be able to get something out of him. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm not entirely sure what he brings to this Germany team right now.
Well, also, like, the thing is that the issue here is, right, he has so many other guys in that position in front of him. at the moment. Pavlovic is back in training, right? He'll be back in March, and you could put your money on it that if Pavlovic is fit, he's probably playing. Same is true for Angelo Stiller, who had to pull out of these games. But then you also look like further down the hierarchy, and is the guy like Rocco Reitz, right, who plays Gladbach and who can play that position as well. And he's making very strong arguments with the U21 at the moment that he probably deserves more game time with the senior team. And so that creates a situation, and that I feel. I mean, this was for me kind of the theme. We will continue with that. With some of the attacking players, we talk about them. I feel like for some of these guys, it really was what for some of these guys, Nagelsmann said, okay, let's call these guys up. Let's call up Brandt. Let's call up Gnabry. Let's call up Sané. Well, Leroy Sané, I think it's a little bit of a special case. So I want to put him in brackets. But let's call up some of these guys and give them one final chance to see how they're doing and whether they can be assets for us. And I look at this attack that seemed so pedestrian at the time. I mean, Julian Brandt was always a really special talent, and I just sensed that I thought this a few weeks ago, and I was really surprised when he was called up. I was like, okay, why? Why is he being called up? How is he still part of this conversation, really, when this Germany team is so rich in attacking talent and so rich in players that can play not just one or two positions, but so many different positions. And I mean, this is an argument that when we get to it, I will do about Leroy Sané too, is it seems like he's part of this generation of players where they're all technically gifted. They're all kind of these central / attacking midfielders that can do certain things really well, but are not quite as rounded. And there's this generation of players coming up. And I think someone actually put this in the chat just now, like, someone like Maxi Bayer, for example, which just seems more rounded. Dennis Undav is another one who's more rounded, right? There's so many players that can just do so many different things really well. I mean, we're going to have a discussion soon about Paul Wanner, for example, as well. There's a guy at Celtic Glasgow who's doing really well, Nico Kuhn, right? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's there is riches there now. So, I sense with Brandt is like Nagelsmann said, okay, well, I haven't seen him in a year. Let's see how he does in this environment. And if you Brandt, okay, I haven't been here in a year. I'm getting 90, like 60, 70 minutes against Hungary in a game that doesn't really matter. I better show what I can do so that I can prove that I'm worth for playing time compared to the players that are already here, but also to the players who are going to come up. And I didn't see it. I saw nothing there today that makes me think, okay, Julian Brandt is supposed to be part of the starting 11.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think Brandt's such an interesting one because I think he actually is an unfortunate yardstick to use to gauge just how impressive guys like Florian Wirtz and Jamal Musiala are, in the sense that, like, Musiala and Wirtz both play almost identical positions to Julian Brandt, but they've got so many more strings to their bow in the way that, and I think the key thing is that's always let Julian Brandt down, in my opinion, and maybe this is just a perception thing, because I know he does do a lot off the ball, and when you do watch Dortmund live, you realise he is running around, he's getting stuck in. I know he kind of has his reputation for being a bit of a pretty boy, and he looks like he should be like, the lead singer of NSYNC or something like that. But he does get stuck in, and I do appreciate that. So I know that's unfair, but he just doesn't really seem to have the tenacity of Wirtz and Musiala, in the sense that if they lose the ball or they misplace a pass or a shot doesn't come off, they get stuck in and they do it again and again and again and again. And that's the thing I love about both of them. They demand the ball. They get angry when they don't get the ball. They go furious. They fight with the teammates. They blow up. Well, they don't really blow up, but like you can see on the pitch, they demand that center of gravity shifted towards them every time the ball comes down the pitch. And everything has to go through them. It's the same at Leverkusen, it's the same at Bayern Munich. And when they both play for Germany, they realize, okay, we know how to, you're the yin to my yang, or whatever else, and they both just kind of share that spotlight perfectly well, and it's a wonderful system. Julian Brandt has weirdly never had that aspect to his game. He's got wonderful finesse. He's an outstandingly technical player when he wants to be. He can take any touch. He can make any pass. He can make any shot. He has routinely for the last 5 or 6 seasons been Dortmund's not only their best playmaker, but at times their only playmaker. It's crazy how much that club relies on them. I was actually in a Dortmund message board a few days ago on Reddit, and someone put up a post about saying, Julian Brandt, how does this guy still get a game? And there were so many Dortmund fans being like, you have no idea what you're talking about. This guy has been dragging Dortmund into the top six for the last kind of couple of years. And I appreciate that. I think he is like a almost underappreciated servant for Dortmund, but he just doesn't have that aspect of his game that Wirtz and Musiala have, I think. And that was so evident in this match, where you do see him kind of drifting through the lines, and you could maybe be polite and say like, oh, he's been mercurial, he's been that kind of quiet kind of playmaker, and he's just waiting for the right time to pounce. But and maybe there is an aspect of that works, but I just think compared to Musiala and Wirtz, he just lacks the leadership. He lacks the responsibility which you need to be a playmaker and to start for Germany in those positions. I think you could probably apply the same thing to Nmecha actually as well, where you're absolutely right. When guys like Pavlovic and Angelo Stiller come in, they're younger than Nmecha, and they step into this game, like then into this team, and they're like, give me the ball. I'm going to dictate how we play this game. I'm going to dictate how we pass. Nothing is getting out of defence without me touching it first. And Nmecha doesn't have that. And and maybe it's a coincidence that we're just talking about two Dortmund players here, but I think you're absolutely right in saying both of them, not just in this game, because it's not really fair to blame him on just a 90-minute match in a Nations League game. It doesn't really matter. But I think you could say that for much of Julian Brandt's career, really, that he's always been that kind of 9/10 of a player who's lacked that kind of final thing to make him a great player. And I think now that Germany have guys like Florian Wirtz and Jamal Musiala in the team, it actually allows us to now almost retrospectively be like, that's what Julian Brandt didn't have. That's why he never became that star player for Germany.
Yeah, when I look at Brandt and I compare him to Wirtz and Musiala, which is so unfair because those two players are going to be some of the best players in the world, right? But he just lacks that deep penetration as an attacking player. Right, he doesn't have that ability to get beyond that final attacking line, and that's so true for a lot of these players of his generation, and which is why there was maybe such a big drop off from the 2014 World Cup generation, and then the 2018 World Cup, the 2022 World Cup generation, and then ultimately with Musiala and Wirtz emerging, a lot of that got fixed. And I think that is a really big part of this game. And it's not just Musiala and Wirtz. Obviously, when those two play, it's better. But there also is more players now coming up that can play a deep pass more effectively. And again, I'm going back to Stiller and Pavlovic and those guys, right? Who can really add something to that attacking line. And so there's this kind of like half mid generation of players that kind of seem to be a little lost. I call them the Generation Werner. Because they're all that kind of age. And, even another guy that stands out to me is Kai Havertz. Someone actually just put it in the chats, right? And I agree fully with Flipsicle here. He managed to change his game dramatically. I mean, today is a great example. He comes off the bench, right? And with, 60 seconds, 65 seconds, he hits the post with a fantastic volley. Right away, dangerous. And that I think is maybe what is lacking from some of these other guys in comparison to the Wirtzes and the Musialas and the Havertzes, or even, Dennis Undav has that too. Tim Kleindienst, I thought was fantastic against Bosnia. He really showed how well integrated he was in the game, and really managed to get into that final third and managed to get into these, what the Germans call Schnittstellen, right? These in between the lines where you can really be dangerous. And so he fits that system quite well as well. And it's kind of just fascinating how all these players have it, and Germany is increasingly going back to these guys, and that's I think also why there has been such a massive turnaround for this national team, because all of a sudden you have players that are able to get beyond the final defensive line and create dangerous situations, and unfortunately there's some players that just don't have it, and then you kind of need to move on from them.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make the point that it's almost quite interesting that we're having this discussion about Germany, because the whole point of Nagelsmann coming in was that he was going to be a breath of fresh air from the Hansi Flick era, where Flick, whether because he felt like he was in an impossible situation where he had to stand by so many players that, when he was assistant manager, he built up a huge reputation with, or relationship with, But Julian Nagelsmann was able to come in as the new guy and say, look, I'm I'm starting something new here. I don't care if you won the World Cup with Yogi Löw. I don't care if you're Hansi Flick's best friend. I need to build a new squad here. And that's what he's done really effectively in 2024, to the point where, we were talking about going into the Euros that we were amazed that he managed to turn things around so quickly. It's interesting, though, that we still do kind of have these kind of 4 or 5 players from the previous generation who, as you say, have now more or less proven that they're not quite good enough for Germany, but are still kind of getting a look in. And I suppose if I was going to try and be polite, or maybe try and say that Nagelsmann is trying to be diplomatic about this, I would say that he maybe doesn't want to do too much too soon. He can't just drop 25 players and call up 25 new players. But you would like to think that kind of going forward, especially in 2025, that over the next 5 months before the next game, Nagelsmann will start to think, right, I gave Julian Brandt or Gnabry or Leroy Sané or Robin Koch their swan song. They got a few games out of me. They didn't do particularly well. I'm now ready to look at other guys. And I've got the under 21s team up in front of me. And you're absolutely right. There's a number of players in that team who not only are good young prospects, but they're also players who are already kind of proven it at club level. Karim Adeyemi is the obvious one who really should be obviously a senior player, but was put into the under 21s and picked up a nasty injury for Germany. So if he manages to come back for Dortmund and play as well as he did at the start of the season, you would think he'd kind of be an obvious one. He's still only 22. Paul Vanner's another one who we spoke about. Brian Gruda, who someone was talking about in the chat, it's obviously one as well. We'll have to see how they do. Angzar Knauf, Eintracht Frankfurt's actually one that I kind of wanted to mention as well. He's kind of really low-key, really stepped up his game, I thought, at Frankfurt this season. It's maybe gone under the radar because Marmoush and Hugo Ekitike are obviously kind of stealing the headlines, but I think, I suspect every time Dortmund catch a Frankfurt game, they're probably, furious that they let that guy go because he's really developing into a great player. And then obviously defensively, you've got guys like Nathaniel Brown as well, who, as you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned on this live stream or in the subscriber chat that you'd like to see them get called up. So
yeah,
there's 5 or 6 players there who could easily kind of step into the positions that we've talked about on the show here. And maybe, if we were playing Football Manager or FIFA, then you'd be like, yeah, of course, you just bring in the young player and replace him with the old player. But obviously, I think Nagelsmann's got to do a lot more diplomacy there. He can't just be cutting guys left, right, centre because, everyone's friends and you don't want to be kind of ruining the atmosphere there. But I suspect that Nagelsmann will have a lot of these guys on his shortlist, not to mention the guys that you mentioned, obviously, for example, in Italy, playing in Italy and stuff like that, who, over the course of the next 12 months, I reckon we'll probably see a lot more of them. And this game tonight just kind of proves that we definitely need them.